the Pentagon is running out of weapons, basically, and they need to pass this emergency package of funding to buy a whole new lot of weapons. And at the moment, they might be able to squeak that through. There will be some kind of gnashing of teeth from kind of some Republicans, but basically they'll succeed. But if the Democrats can win back both houses in the midterms, then suddenly things like, basic things like, how do we replace the missiles that we've fired during this war so far becomes a lot trickier.
We are ploughing on with the Trump dump. We are not skipping on our regular nightly trip to Washington, and helping us with that tonight is the Times' Washington reporter, George Grylls. George, hi, good evening.
Good afternoon.
Oh, of course, good afternoon, yeah, forgive me, obviously. How are you? How's Washington this afternoon?
It's all right, it's pretty muggy.
Is it? Yeah. Do you know it's been deceptively hot here as well, actually, where I am in London, and busy. And it really feels like actually Washington isn't having much of a sort of summer break. I know the recess isn't quite the same thing in the same sort of style at the same sort of time in Washington, but it's been a busy couple of weeks and lots of midterm elections we need to talk about in a moment. Another twist, another fascinating story. They've all got really interesting stories, these midterm primaries, I should say, sorry, for the midterms. Let's start, though, with Iran. George, and we'll start with President Trump declaring what he's described as economic D-Day against Iran, warning that any countries offering Iran a financial lifeline will face tremendous economic consequences. He spoke to reporters earlier. The president addressed the question about the sanctions themselves.
Well, we have things that we could sanction. We have very draconian sanctions, and we'll see what happens. Right now, the strait is open. A lot of boats are coming through. People aren't reporting that, and that may slow down a little bit at some point. But right now, a lot of boats are coming through. The naval blockade has been extremely effective.
We spoke earlier, George, to Ambassador Dennis Ross, who's former US envoy to the Middle East, and he was pretty scathing about them, really, and particularly the fact that they didn't reach places like, these are sanctions that don't reach Beijing, for example, who obviously continue to trade with Iran. How have they gone down in Washington?
So I think what President Trump is really trying to do is make sure that there are no US allies in the Middle East who are hedging their bets. He's basically saying you've got to pick sides. Either you're with us or you're with Iran. And that's particularly directed to Gulf countries and places like the UAE. So just a few kind of hours before he made this announcement, the UAE said they were going to suspend all their trade with Iran. And that's a really big problem for Iran, because Iran has been under sanctions for years and years and years, but they've always found kind of ways around them. And a city like Dubai, which is only around 100 miles away from the Iranian coast, is a perfect outlet for them to continue to access Western markets, get goods, get money. And Dubai has been able to kind of look both ways, both to kind of enjoy the protection of the US and the West and continue to be a kind of tourist hub for lots of Westerners visiting, at the same time basically helping Iran, keep the Iranian economy afloat. And Trump is now kind of come to the end of his tether and said, look, come to countries like the UAE, if you want to be with us, you got to be with us. And this is his kind of next lever that he's pulled as he tries to kind of tighten the screws of this economic blockade on Iran.
And look, it depends who you ask how important Congress is and how Congress feels about this. Obviously, it matters what the American people think about this. But in terms of sort of Washington, the movers and shakers in Washington, the people that you're talking to, how are they reflecting on this particular chapter in this conflict?
Well, I think they're within the Republican Party. I think there's a large segment of those who are standing for election in November in the midterms you just mentioned, who would like it all to go away and for Trump to kind of wrap it up as soon as possible, because they think that American voters are not going to be particularly happy when they go to fill up their cars at the moment and they see the prices, and that's going to be reflected in the results come November. So there's plenty of Republicans who would quite like for this all to go away. I would say there's a smaller part of the Republican Party who are kind of the remnants of the neoconservative wing who would like Trump to keep going. But look, if he turned around tomorrow and said, I'm calling this whole thing off, this has been a mistake and let's end it, I think there would basically be a lot of rejoicing from most Republicans, particularly those facing re-election later this year.
And that's obviously understandably politically motivated. How about the sort of legalities of it? We spent a lot of time, didn't we, George, talking about the legalities of this and whether the threshold at which Donald Trump would have to go back to Congress and seek approval sort of came and went with a pausing of the conflict and a playing around with the wording which allowed this to continue without having to go back to Congress. And obviously there are precedents for that. Barack Obama used the same sort of instrument. Has that sort of gone away? Has that faded into the distance, or is there still a restlessness in Washington about that?
Well, the Republicans have a majority in both houses of Congress, so Congress has basically abrogated its responsibility to be involved and said, over to you, Mr. President, do what you want so far in the conflict. At some point, perhaps they may lose patience, but there's been no real sign of that yet, and there's only been the occasional kind of indicative vote, but nothing to actually restrain Trump's hand. And so I don't think that's really a factor in this.
Does it change in the makeup of Congress from November onwards, assuming this conflict is still going? Does that bring that back into play potentially?
Quite possibly. I mean, it makes Trump's life a hell of a lot more difficult in lots of different ways. I mean, for example, at the moment, the Pentagon is running out of weapons, basically, and they need to pass this emergency package of funding to buy a whole new lot of weapons. And at the moment, they might be able to squeak that through. There will be some kind of gnashing of teeth from kind of some Republicans, but basically they'll succeed. But if the Democrats can win back both houses in the midterms, then suddenly things like, basic things like, how do we replace the missiles that we've fired during this war so far becomes a lot trickier. And so, yeah, I think it does become a lot trickier from November onwards for him to keep prosecuting this war.
Okay. Speaking of November, Alaska's voters there face this is happening this week in anticipation for November. These primaries are happening, of course, ahead of the midterms, and Alaskan voters have an extraordinary decision to make where they will choose between a guy called Dan Sullivan or Dan Sullivan.
That's right. So there are amazingly two candidates on the ballot in Alaska called Dan Sullivan. There's Dan Sullivan, the incumbent Republican senator, and then up popped this random guy from a tiny town in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, said, I'm going to challenge you. And as it so happens, my name is also Dan Sullivan. Now, the original Dan Sullivan, Senator Dan Sullivan, said, this is just a Democrat ruse. They're trying to siphon votes away from me. How dare you stand? And the other Dan Sullivan said, hang on, my dad was called Dan Sullivan and my grandfather was called Dan Sullivan, so I have as much right to the name Dan Sullivan as you do, Dan Sullivan. Anyway, so there's been a primary this week, basically, for who will get on the final ballot for November's midterms. And the top four proceed. And Senator Dan Sullivan has got through. Mary Peltola, who's the Democrat candidate, has gone through. Votes will still be counted because it's a massive state and it's quite hard to get all the ballots in from all these different kind of various corners of it. But amazingly, Dan Sullivan, number 2, looks like he might get through to the final runoff, which will be a moment of joy for all journalists across the world covering this Senate election, because writing about Dan Sullivan versus Dan Sullivan is just endlessly fun.
And is that good news or bad news for Dan Sullivan, do you think?
Which one?
Precisely. Okay, let's move on. I'd like to quickly ask you about crypto, if you don't mind, because Donald Trump is trying to get through a crypto bill, isn't he? An interesting sort of development in this today, because crypto hit a $70,000 marker in its kind of value. That comes as Donald Trump is urging Congress to pursue and to pass key legislation which would establish sort of clear rules for trading digital assets that many argue sort of works in its favour. Crypto, Donald Trump's relationship to it, the family's relationship to it, this administration's relationship to it, and its legal process and its journey through Congress is fascinating, isn't it, George?
Yeah, well, the Trump family has made hundreds of millions of dollars since Trump has returned to the White House, and most of that has come through its crypto holdings. Bear in mind, only a few years ago, Trump was kind of dismissive of the industry and had not much interested in it really. And then he kind of launched his own business, his crypto venture. And funnily enough, it's done extremely well. And a lot of the kind of titans of the crypto industry also kind of flocked to his campaign in 2024 because they thought that he would have a more permissive approach to regulation than the Democrats. So that's the context for what's going on here.
Okay, interesting. Can we talk quickly about Harry and Meghan? We have to, because it is as much an America story as it is a United Kingdom story, of course, because they are leaving California, George. They are moving back to the United Kingdom this month. It's been 6 years they've been there. Let's remind ourselves about their arrival in America and what they sort of said at the time. Because when they moved, the expectation was high that they were going to sort of embark on new media projects, that this was really going to stick and there was going to be a sort of long-term new life and career for them after this now infamous interview with Oprah Winfrey.
I need to do this for my family. This is not a surprise to anybody. It's really sad that it's got to this point, but I've got to do something for my own mental health, for my wife's, and for Archie's as well, because I could see where this was headed.
They didn't want him to be a prince or a princess, not knowing what the gender would be, which would be different from protocol, and that he wasn't going to receive security.
What?
It was really hard.
Okay, the reaction to this has been probably about sort of 40%. What are they doing? 40% I don't care, and probably about 20% welcome back. What's it been like in America, George?
I think pretty muted, to be honest. Back, 5-6 years ago, there was a lot of sympathy for them. I guess people got a bit bored of their presence, and it's not like America's short of celebrities, and the thing that made them special was surely the royal family and being part of that. And so by and bear in mind there's so much affection for the royal family still in the US. When the king visited last year, you would get so much more coverage of that than any kind of politics story, domestic politics story. But, they removed themselves from the royal family. They took away the thing that made them special to America by living in California.
Right.
And now they're heading back. So I guess in that period, they're kind of the American public's interest in them did feel like it kind of dropped.
Okay, that's interesting. And I think that's very interesting in the context of what happens here with them as well. I was saying earlier that I think the economics of the content and coverage around Harry and Meghan is really important at the moment. It is one of the top viewed and read stories on the Times website. There is a massive amount of interest in this. If that interest wanes, that will change the nature of what they do, right? And what kind of product they sell and who they are. Might also change the nature of the media's interaction with them, the coverage of them, those kind of frictions that we've seen bubble up before. So what the public think about this story and think about them is going to be crucial to how it plays out, I think, and what goes next. George, we're out of time, but lovely to talk to you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's George Grylls, who is the Times' Washington correspondent with us on Times Radio.